Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I add another little fairy to my Cicely Mary Barker study list. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I am going to link down below all of my supplies that I'm using for this project, along with other videos where you can see previous studies in this category and also my studies from Beatrix Potter, which was the study before the Cicely Mary Barker study. As you can see, we are starting out with a wash of baked earth from Derwent Inktense pencils, and I have my Winsor Newton mop brush there, kind of getting an even spread on everything. Here are some of my other supplies. I have a microfiber cloth. I've taped this down. I've left it taped, and I'll explain that in just a minute why I have left that taped. I have two brushes. This one is from Winsor Newton, is my size 6 round, and then I have a size 8 round from the Royal Langnickel Zen series. I have 1 cup of water for this, and over to the side I have my Winsor & Newton pan paints. Now these, again, all of my supplies will be listed below, and there's where I previously swatched those out so I remember what colors are in each little slot. And we're going to get started. On the screen I will have the colors listed for you in case I forget to mention them, but we're going to start out with the background on this, and then we're going to move to the foreground. So I'm starting with the sky, and her sky was sort of a blue-gray. It was very light, but I thought I would add a little bit darker to this area because I know those leaves are going to be dark, and all of this is going to dry a little bit lighter than what you see on the screen once it is put down. So I know I want to start with a good base back there, and then I'm going to move forward. And if you've watched my other series but you haven't had a chance to watch the first one in the Cicely Mary Barker, you know that when we were doing Beatrix Potter, I said she sort of, quote, I'm using air quotes, used a dry brush. And I didn't have a lot of water in my brush, so I have switched over to Cicely Mary Barker, and she likes to put down washes underneath and use a lot of water. So I'm switching back and forth between brushes. You will see me do that. In this piece, I'm starting with this Royal Langnickel brush, the size 8, because it actually holds more water for me than the Winsor & Newton, and that's what I need. I need a lot of water. So you'll see me touch the water quite a bit. I'm not going to just use the water that's in the palette. I'm actually going to be having a brush that's loaded with water so I can move these colors around and put on successive layers. So I'm going to go ahead and mix all of these colors up that are going to be for the background. And I missed one. You'll see me come back and put that in when we're about halfway finished because I needed something that was a little more sage green. So I'm using the same base colors on things, and I will keep this side of the palette. You're going to see this side of the palette, and then when we move forward, come to the foreground, I want to keep these colors. So I'm going to switch around because my little palette there has an area on one side that you can mix paint and on the other side. So I'm going to utilize both sides so that I don't have to remix things and I have them right there, and you can keep up with them as well. And if I'm not putting the colors on the screen that I'm using, then it's because I've previously put that on there. I've tried to catch that, though, this time to make sure I put all of the color names down in my mixing as we go along. So the process I'm doing now on these leaves is, again, super wet brush. I'm putting down the base color that I see underneath all of her other colors. So if it's a light blue-green, that's what I'm going to put down. Now the second leaf I worked on, I put color down and then I dropped other color on top, just as I'm doing here. And that allows those colors to blend together so that we get a nice smooth blend with different shades of green, and then we can come back on top and put some more detail with a drier brush. So that's the whole process for the leaves, just dropping those colors in. It takes practice figuring out what colors to put down first. I like to look at it as if I'm viewing an x-ray and to see what's underneath the next layer. You really have to look hard and try to ascertain what the first shade was that she put down, because she does come back and she puts other colors down on top, and depending on what you have underneath, that is going to change the color that you layer on top of it. And if you haven't caught my videos before, I did put the wash over the entire thing so that I would have more of an aged look on the paper. So as I'm laying my colors down, I'm keeping that in mind as well, because I want mine to look as close to hers as possible. Now, granted, I'm not using the same paints that she used, but I'm trying to use what I have to get the same feel for her work. So I want it to look like an old piece, and therefore I'm tinting the entire thing with that creamy color, which mimics tea. If you watch my Beatrix Potter videos, you know I use tea for those, but one of you talked about the acidity of the tea and what that would do to your piece over time, and I thought, you know, that's a good point. So thank you. Right now I can't remember which one of you it was, but thank you so much. You're the reason that I am using the Derwent ink tints, because this person said I use Derwent ink tints to, quote, make tea. So that's what I'm going to be doing on all of these older studies. So I'm going to be quiet for a while and let you watch me lay down all of these colors. I'm going to hop back on in a minute when we switch gear to the foreground. I'm giving you a wider shot here so you can see both sides of my palette. Now these are Winsor & Newton paints. However, this is not the palette that they came in originally. That palette is a travel palette and it's plastic, and it really doesn't have the area I need for mixing colors. This one just fits on the screen better. So don't get confused because I have two sides. Don't go looking for those Winsor & Newtons like mine because you won't find this. I'm going to link down below the set that I have in case you want to get this particular set, but this is not the palette that they came in. So what I'm doing now is laying down all of these beautiful colors on her little wings, and we're going to move to the flower and her dress. And I told you there was a reason I kept this taped down to my desk for a little while. Normally, if you've watched my videos in the past, you know I'm not a person that likes to tape things down. However, I am using so much water, and this is what I would consider to be a smaller piece of paper. So I want to go ahead and keep that taped down so it doesn't like fold up and wrinkle on me when I'm trying to work, because there is a lot of water I'm having to use. So that's what we're doing here. Now you'll notice on the wing above this, I got at the very top edge of it, I have so much water on my brush, it ran over into that top edge of the wing, but we're going to put some more color on later. I did pick up my size 6, which only had a little bit of water in it, clean brush to try to pull some of that up. It didn't pull a lot up, but that's okay because the color is going to be taken care of later. When I get to her dress, I do add color where I shouldn't add color. It's a little too dark, and I need some areas to create some of the wrinkles and folds in her dress. So I'll have to remove that later. So hang on, because towards the end of the video, you're going to see how I correct that. It's right in here. Right in here. Stuff gets a little too dark. Something that I found interesting when I looked at her colors, she had something in there that looked almost like a gray. And I thought, I don't think it's really gray. It's not really gray. It's the mixing of the colors and allowing them to run together. So I'm using that alizarin crimson for my pink, and I'm using a lot of water in it, so it's not red, it's going to be pink. And then I am laying down that blue-green on top. And what happens when those two colors are wet and they mix together, you're getting a graying effect. So I was so happy when I discovered this, because I thought, you know, I think I figured it out. I think she put a red down and then added her blue-green to it, and it gave her those gray tones. So thrilled that I found that out, so I had to share that with you. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the colors down, all the washes down on her little dress and that flower, and it's the basic process that I did for the leaves that are behind her. I'm going to hop off again, and I'll be back in just a minute. We are now ready to mix the colors for her skin tone. And she was a little more orange, and she had some burnt umber for shadows. And I saw that on the previous one that I did, but he had a little more yellow tone to him, whereas she has a little bit darker tone, and I think that's the shading on her. So I'm giving a very light wash, and the two colors I used up there were the alizarin crimson and the yellow ochre. And what you didn't see, I cut that part out because it takes me a little while to go back and forth and try to get the good base color. I'm not worried about all the shadows right now. I'm going to come back and put those on later. I just want that basic skin tone before I move forward and let that get dry. I'm going to put a little color on her cheeks because I like for that to kind of blend in and not set on the face. So I want to do that while she's wet. I have switched to the size 6 brush, not because I need it to have less water, but because I need it to be a little bit smaller so I don't get outside the perimeters on things. I'm not painting her hair, so that will come last. I don't want to paint anything dark around these skin tones because I have a tendency to hit that with my brush and drag it down into the areas where I do not want that color. So that's why we are not coloring the hair. So she's going to have white hair until she's going to be like me, going to have white hair until she gets toward the end. Just going to drop these little colors in, just looking for where colors change. Again, not worrying too much about shadows. I know there's a little more red on that side of her arm, so I'm putting that in, and it looks like I'm doing shadows, but I'm actually just adding the different shades on top, and we will correct all the shadows once this has dried and we get toward the end of the piece. While I let everything in the foreground dry, you can see I am giving you a close-up again, and I've turned my palette around and we're back to the background colors. I'm using the same colors that I used before. And the thing about layering is when you use one color and you let it dry and you come back and put the same color on top, it's going to be just a little bit darker, and that's what we needed for quite a bit of this. I am using that size 6 round from Winsor Newton because at this point we're not wanting a lot of those really watery, loose layers down. We're actually wanting to start almost drawing with our paintbrush. So now she's switched to a technique that I used mostly with Beatrix Potter. And I did the same thing in my last little fairy piece. I noticed that I had to use a very light, loose wash and then come back with a brush that doesn't hold as much water so that I can get some thicker layers on top. But this is what is giving her her definition. This is allowing her to define shapes. It's allowing her to define shading. So that's what we're going to do on this. And to me, it kind of speeds up the process on the piece. And if you watched my last video, you know I did it in 2 parts, and they were both almost 40-minute videos. One may have been 40 minutes. This one is 40 minutes, but guys, I got it all in one video. So I'm getting a little faster, and this one wasn't any less intricate than the one I did before. But I think once you start doing stuff and really practicing with it, it's like anything, you get a little bit faster. So I'm getting a little bit faster here. I'm going to bring in some burnt umber because I need that to drop into some of the leaves, plus I need it for the vines and that little stem on top of her hat there. So I'm going to keep laying these down, and then I'm going to hop back on in a few minutes and we'll talk a bit more. And some of the areas on the leaves, I'm going back to the technique I used to lay the first colors down on the paper. I am using a little more water on my brush so that when I lay the colors down, they can kind of move together and blend in seamlessly. So we go from one color, maybe a blue-green as we're doing here, and it will just mesh right in with that brown. I need to do that in those areas to get the color effect that she had. However, I'm going to need to put some colors down on this particular little leaf. This is the leaf that's coming up under the flower, and I'm starting with green, but it has a pink, and I'm going to use that alizarin crimson, but I'm going to use a little darker, not as much water in it. It has a little bit of a pink going around it, and here we go with that. And you'll see it's not bleeding in to the color below it. And that is because I'm using less water on my brush. So I can have wet colors side by side and they won't blend together. You have to do that with water control on your brush. That's why I keep that microfiber cloth handy. You'll see me reaching across the piece ever so often to wipe my brush. And I will dab the color and then I will go and hit my microfiber cloth with it and then go back to the piece. So I still have color on it, but it's pulling the water out. And you don't have to use a microfiber cloth. It's just that we got a pack of those from our local Walmart and it had like 30 in it. And I'm like, we don't need all of these. So I keep a couple at my desk. So that's what I'm doing to lay these colors side by side while it's wet, and they'll juxtaposition. Or if I want them to blend together, I just make sure my brush has a little more water in it. That is all we are going to do with those leaves in the background. They are finished. And now we're coming to the foreground. So her little wings, I'm doing, again, the same technique. I'm using very little water on my brush so that I can basically draw all of these features in. If they get a little too bright on me, I simply touch my water as I did there, touch my microfiber cloth, and then come back and soften it up. And you can see that top edge, I'm fixing that where I let the paint go over a little too far. So we're still going to get that light edge on the wing right there because I'm being a little more careful and I don't have as much water on my brush, so it's easier to control and to keep it from going over where it's not supposed to be. Another reason I like to paint the hair last is because of what you're seeing right here. I want to paint the colors underneath. I don't want to have to paint around her hair that I've painted in. So I know that her hair is dark and it's going to cover all of that up, but I want to be able to have that color peek through like it would with regular hair. So I'm wanting to paint those wings first and then come back and paint her hair on top. So same process, just going to keep laying these colors down and then we're going to keep moving through the foreground on the piece. This is that little area on her dress that I told you about that the color's just a little too dark for me, and it's the base color that's too dark. I am trying to correct it as I did with the wings at the top, just coming back and basically drawing with the brush. but I'm gonna need to lift that color out. It's just too much. Her wings and her dress have the basic colors, the same basic colors. So that was pretty cool. I didn't have to switch my palette up on that. And what I'm doing here, you can see I'm coming back in. I got a little too much color down there and I wanted to push it over to the side. It needed to be a little lighter on the left-hand side. So just a damp brush that you've cleaned and then dabbed on your rag, and then you're able to lift and pull color where you need it to be. Here are those shadows on the skin, and I have remade the color I used before, but it's a little bit thicker. It doesn't have as much water in it. I'm not wanting there to be just a light wash. I'm wanting to go ahead and add those shadows in. I am not going to put over 2 layers of color on the whole piece except for the wings. I do come back and add a 3rd layer in some areas to get some shadows, but I'm not wanting to add too many layers on this because it was a very light piece. There wasn't a lot of harshness in the amount of layers that she added, because the more layers you add, that some areas are going to get even darker. This is a very sweet, light piece, and so I don't want to go over 2 layers. I did something in the last piece on the eye and I hesitated on it. I didn't know if I wanted to do it. I inked in the eye. It's hard to tell in some areas whether she uses her brush to draw in the detail or if she inks it. I decided on the last one to ink the eye, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't have. So when I got to this one, I thought, oh, I'm not going to ink the eye. But the more I looked at it, I'm like, you don't see a whole eyeball. You only see a hint of it. And I don't want to have to paint those lashes in. So I'm going to go ahead and just ink that area, and that's what I did. So her nostril, you saw that I put a little bit of the burnt umber on that side of her nostril. I didn't ink that in. That was very light. We don't want to, whether you're drawing a portrait or you're painting a portrait. I have been doing portraits for over, well, it's probably been about 30 years I've been doing portraits or more, and you don't want to draw in every area on the face. You want to allow your shadows to create those areas for you. So that's why I tapped that with the brown, and then I cleaned my brush off and tapped it again to pull a little bit of the color out, because I'm not wanting to draw that nostril, the side of the nostril in. I'm wanting to give a hint of the shadow. So we're using those browns to come back in, and that's what she did in her last piece. She uses browns to kind of create all of those shadows, and she does not use black. Now I do use black in this piece. Black, ivory black is what is in this particular set. I just call it black, but I don't use black in my personal pieces. I like to make darks any other way except using black, but I do on these older pieces pick up black to create different shades, but I do not use it as shadows on the face. I've never done that, and she does not do that either. So we're going to keep doing a little bit more shading here, and we're almost ready to do her hair. All of my colors down for the hair, and you saw I added in the burnt sienna, and then we have the burnt umber, and I took some of the cadmium free yellow and put that down on top of her head, right on top of where her little hair splits right up there at the part. I'm not going to put but 2 layers on here, so I want to create a nice light effect up at the top. It was more of a yellow orange right on top of her head, so I'm using the technique that I did to put the washes on in the beginning. I'm just allowing water to let it all kind of run together, and I'm using the size 6 round. Again, doesn't hold as much water, but I'm using more water than I was using for some of these areas because I'm trying to get a wash on. And using this smaller brush allows me to get into those small areas, but it also allows me to pick up just enough water to get a good wash in these areas. So I'm laying down the dark color, I'm just dropping it in. I put the lighter burnt sienna down, and then I dropped in the burnt umber. Now I've added a little of black to that burnt umber. I told you I would, and this is going to help me to get the shadows on there. I'm not just using black, I am mixing it with the burnt umber. So the hair's had time to dry, and that's going to allow me to kind of feather that in. And my brush does not have a lot of water on it, and you can tell that paint is almost syrupy. It does not have a lot of water, and I'm not dipping my brush into the water as I'm going back and forth because I want to use it to kind of paint the little hair strands in. Now that we're finished painting her head and her little accessory on her head, I'm picking up this brush. This is from my Royal and Langnickel Zen series brushes, and this is the scrubber brush. And how you use it is very gently. You get water on it, tap the excess off, and it looks like I'm going hard. It's simply because I've speeded up the video, but you can see how I'm going on top of those folds and I'm pulling up the color. It allows me to pull it up down to that base and pull a little bit of that base up, but it doesn't compromise the piece. And now I have folds in her dress. So if you don't have a scrubber brush, I'm not certain if Winsor Newton makes one. I need to check into that. But I did get this in my little set from the Zen series, and it has been so handy. finishing up. I would consider this my third tiny layer on this piece. So mainly the whole piece was just 2 layers. But once I get this done, we are finished with this sweet little fairy. And I really enjoyed this one. I thought she was so cute when I saw her on the website, and I will put that down below as well where I'm getting my reference photos so that you can take a look if you want to do that as well. If you followed along to the end, thank you so much, and again, kudos to you for hanging in there while I rattled along for about 40 minutes. I hope you'll join me in doing these wonderful little fairies. I'll be doing some more and some beginning stuff, so if you're a beginning artist, hang in there. I'll get those videos up soon, and until then, I will see you in the next one.